Hi, my name's Ryan Kennedy, and I'm a chef for Brigaid. Today we're going to talk about cooking pasta. So I've been in a lot of school kitchens over the course of the last few years. I travel around for work a lot, and every kitchen I go to, I see pasta cooking all over the place. There's a lot of different setups in a lot of different kitchens as well. Some have tilt skillets, some have steam kettles, some have steamers, some have stovetops, some only have ovens. By and large, everybody's cooking pasta. I think cooking pasta in schools is pretty challenging because ultimately we're cooking for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of servings, sometimes even more than that. At the school that I used to be the chef at, it was not uncommon for me to come in and cook 100 pounds of pasta in the morning to serve either that day or the following day. So over time, I've tried to develop some tools, sort of like a procedure that we train all of our chefs at, we train all of the cooks at, and whenever we do training other places, we kind of adopt this protocol or this procedure for cooking pasta. And it varies a little bit depending on the shape, and certainly it's varied a little bit because we're using whole grain pasta or whole wheat pasta versus just regular all-purpose pasta. But regardless, the kind of approach is the same. So we're gonna get into those tips and techniques today. Okay, so when it comes to pasta, really the name of the game is texture. We have shells here, we've got elbows here, we've got penne here. To make the doughs, to make these shapes is basically the exact same process. The ingredients are the same. It's flour or whole wheat flour and water. But you know, the eatability, what happens when you take that bite, what happens when you toss it with a specific sauce, what happens when you use it in a cold pasta salad or anything like that, you know, you pick up on those textures, the little bit of ridges, the, you know, negative space for where the shell curls over. You know, macaroni and cheese for an elbow is kind of like pretty classic, the way that penne picks up a marinara or picks up a meat sauce. You know, certain pasta shapes go with certain types of sauces or certain types of preparations because it's all about texture. The same is true when it comes to cooking. You know, like when you're cooking in your process, you're trying to preserve a certain texture at the end. And I'm not here to tell you like what's the appropriate way to cook pasta, whether it be al dente or whether you like it a little bit softer. I'm not suggesting that there's a right way to cook pasta. The right way to cook pasta is how you like to eat pasta. But for us, when it comes to our preparations and like how we train chefs to cook, we are trying to basically cook pasta, and then eventually we'll do a cool either the day before or like really early morning day of, and we're trying to lock that perfect texture in, that texture that we're looking for that dish. That might be a little bit different for macaroni and cheese than it ends up being for like a penne bolognese or something like that, but ultimately our process is in service of preserving a specific texture for each type of pasta. All right, when it comes to preserving texture, I think there's really like three things that we want to pay attention to. It's the cook time, it's what we do while it's cooking, so like stirring it, and then it's our process for cooling. So all of these pasta shapes, shells, elbows, penne, they all have different cook times. The margin isn't huge. You know, it's not like one of these takes 50 minutes and the other takes 6. But generally, a cook time that's pretty standard is anywhere from like 6 to 7 minutes up to like 10 to 11 minutes. And that's really dictated by the density and thickness of the noodle and the shape. So generally a cook time, let's say in the middle, is like 8 to 9 minutes. When I put the pasta into boiling water, I'm going to set my timer for 6 minutes so that I go over there with ample time to really start to babysit it for those last 2 minutes. And during that time, I'm kind of pulling different pieces of pasta out every 30 to 40 seconds, and I'm taking a bite of it and seeing where it's at and evaluating, is it time to pull this off the stove or is it time to keep cooking for a little bit longer? So time is one of those variables, and you can't just say this is our pasta procedure and every time we cook pasta 8 minutes, because as I said, different textures, different thickness, different cook time. The next thing is like, what do you do once it's cooking? I want to stir the pasta a lot, especially if you're cooking in big batches. If you drop, 30 or 40 pounds of pasta into a giant steam kettle, you really have to stir it a couple times throughout that process to kind of disrupt it and keep noodles from clumping, keep them from sticking to the bottom. It's not that you can't get them unstuck later, but a lot of times once that cooking process starts, if those noodles are stuck together in a big clump, it means they're not being exposed to the liquid that's in there because they're touching the other noodles. And so you'll get noodles that are cooked on the outside of the clump, and on the inside you'll get these clusters of like very starchy, very crunchy noodles. And the next method is just cooling method. For us, as I said earlier, like we cook our pasta and cool it fully because we want to lock in that sort of perfect texture that we're looking for. And there are two types of sort of methods for cooling. The first one is just draining it over into a colander and then from there rinsing, which is like a shock to the system, stops the cooking process immediately. Another one, which is more conventional, I would say, in restaurants, is that you would take it, drain your pasta into a colander, and then from there, you would take small batches on sheet trays lined with parchment paper, put them out into a very thin layer, and then roll them directly into a walk-in or put those sheet trays into some other refrigeration so that they cool very rapidly. Again, you probably have a little bit more time where there's some like ambient heat still kind of carrying over from the original cook. But the beauty of that cooling method is that you kind of lock those starches onto the outside of the pasta. You don't rinse them away. And that really does a good job later on when it comes to saucing the pasta for it to grab whatever that sauce is, rather than just have this like really wet pasta that has no starch on it and then this sauce, and those two things don't necessarily go together perfectly well. But not every kitchen has the space to cool pasta in huge batches like that, so the rinse method is perfectly acceptable. There are many school kitchens that are out there that just don't have a stovetop, don't have a tilt skillet, don't have a steam kettle. They don't have, a surface cooking means of cooking pasta. So in those cases, a lot of times alternative methods are really what they have to employ. So we're just going to talk a little bit about cooking pasta in a steamer. And, the principles of what you're trying to do are effectively the same as if you were cooking it on a stovetop, but I think like that technique and the way that you approach it, is a little bit different. So we have our steamer here. It's been preheating for a little while. I could see out on the temperature read that it's around 212 degrees, which is the temperature that water boils at. I've put a 6-inch hotel pan inside with 6 quarts of warm water, and we're just letting that preheat in here in the steamer so that that water temperature is all really warm, so that when we drop this pasta in, it doesn't shock it and it's not sitting there in just tepid water. So you could start that process 30 minutes, an hour before. This is 100% humidity in there. There will be no water evaporation. So again, we're just trying to get the 6 quarts of water that's already in our hotel pan up to around 200 degrees. We're not going to really get it much over that, and that usually takes somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes depending on the steamer. So we've got our hotel pan preheated. I have 5 pounds of pasta here. I found that that's really like the perfect ratio. 5 pounds of dry pasta to 6 quarts of water, preheated and warmed up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're going to open the door, pull out our pre-warmed water. It's nice and steamy. And we're going to drop in our 5 pounds of pasta. We're just going to give it a stir, make sure that it's all covered in water. And then we're going to go right back into the steamer. The bag of pasta said that it was going to cook between 8 and 9 minutes, and I'm going to set my timer for 8 minutes, knowing that this water isn't at 212 degrees, which is basically what a rolling boil on a stovetop would be. So I know it's going to take slightly longer than what the bag says, but I will still want to check it at that 8-minute mark. I also want to make sure that I'm not opening this door in between, because depending on the steamer that you have, they all take a little bit of time to recuperate. It's just like opening an oven door, but in the case of a steamer, sometimes even worse. So we want to let it get that full 8 minutes, and we're just going to trust that it's going to take that amount of time at least. We'll open it at the 8-minute mark, give it a stir, check the doneness. If it needs any more time, then we're going to continue cooking in 1 to 2 minute increments. All right, our pasta's cooked, our pasta's cooled. We did 2 different methods of cook and 2 different methods of cool. So we took the ziti, cooked it traditionally on the stovetop, got it to a rolling boil, got it to the perfect texture, brought it over to the sink, drained it, and then from there we just laid it out on the sheet tray. And you can look at it, you can see that it's a bit darker, more dark brown than the shells, and that's because the starch is still kind of on here. It was air dried or air cooled, I should say, versus this where we did the shells non-conventional method in the steamer, preheated water, took it out, even though we got it to what I would say is like a really, really nice texture. Then we did the rinse, which shocked it, locked in that texture, but you could see just from the look of it that it's still a little bit wet. It's not going to grab the sauce as well as this would, but either way, these are like perfectly acceptable methods for cooking and cooling pasta. And we all know that like not every kitchen has a stovetop, not every kitchen has a tilt skillet or a kettle. So sometimes you got to rely on the steamer and be resourceful. And I think that this is a perfectly acceptable way to kind of still nail that texture. I have here just like a Cambro with 8 quarts of pre-cooked pasta. We cool our pasta. We cook it, cool it. You can do this process the day before. And the beauty of it is what I've been talking about is really like locking in that texture. And then I would take it from here once it was perfectly cooled and we'd start to batch it out. Whatever that batch size is, obviously that's going to be dependent on your school and the recipe. But I like to batch it out because the following day, when it comes time for service, we can just do a quick reheat of our pasta. You could do it in the steamer in a perforated pan, or you could do it on a stovetop with like a little basket, drop the pasta into already warm water, reheat it really quickly, and then whatever the sauce is, a marinara sauce, a bolognese sauce, Alfredo sauce, mac and cheese sauce, any warm pasta sauce mixed with just quickly warmed pasta, it's kind of perfect. You can cook through service, or you can have a bunch of pans ready in almost no time. The alternatives, which is what you see in a lot of kitchens, not only in schools, is I need to do 400 portions of pasta. I'm going to cook a real lot of that on the stovetop. I'm going to mix that with a ton of sauce. It's going to be held for a really long time, and then you start to lose that texture. You know, the pasta gets mushy, it starts to break up, and then you don't get that nice finished product for the kids. Even if you have a beautiful sauce, even if you cook the pasta perfectly, just that hold time, you're really locked in. So we like to pre-cook, cool, batch it out, do quick reheats, and then mix with warm sauce. And it's just pan after pan after pan. We're never more than like 90 seconds or 2 minutes away from a pan, which is the preferred technique for, you know, all of the times that I've made pasta. So hopefully both of these processes will be like super helpful for you, and you can adapt them to your kitchen and help you get, you know, nicely cooked pasta in the future.